You are listening to Mystery Media Group.
Yay! I'm here to tell you a story that will make your hair stand on end. Grab your favorite blanket and cuddle up because you're listening to Jill's Chills. For Halloween, we're going to talk about the history of Halloween this year. And who can talk about the history of Halloween unless you involve the Celts? The ancient culture known as the Celts once extended far beyond the British Isles. With territory stretching from Spain to the Black Sea, the Celts were geographically the largest group of people to inhabit ancient Europe. The difficulty of tracing Celtic history is that none of these ancient peoples living in Western or Central Europe would have called themselves Celts. That name came from the Greeks, who made their first contact with a barbarian people they called the Keltoi in 540 BC on the southern coast of France. The ancient Celts were never a single kingdom or an empire, but a collection of hundreds of tribal chiefdoms with a shared culture and distinctive language. Since the Celts themselves left no written histories, we're left to rely on the admittedly biased accounts of their enemies in battle, the Greeks and later the Romans. Historians don't know why the Greeks called them the Keltoi, but the name stuck, and the Celts developed a reputation in Greece as hard-drinking, hard-fighting savages. Celtic warriors often battled naked and were prized as mercenaries throughout the Mediterranean. The Romans called the Celts Galli or Gallia and frequently clashed with Celtic tribes that invaded Roman outposts in northern Italy. In 1387 BC, a fearless Celtic warrior named Brennus sealed the barbaric reputation of the Celts by violently sacking and pillaging Rome and putting most of the Roman Senate to the sword. Centuries later, after the Roman Empire had conquered several Celtic tribes in the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal, and Spain, Julius Caesar embarked on the 9-year Gallic Wars to defeat the Celts and various other tribal kingdoms in Gaul, modern France. Caesar wrote about the conquest of Gaul with a mix of disgust and respect for his Celtic enemies. In the end, Caesar makes a clear distinction between civilized Mediterranean world of Rome and the great unwashed Celts in Gaul, so Romans are justified in colonizing them, says Bettina Arnold, an anthropology professor at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and the founding editor of E Keltoi, Journal of Interdisciplinary Celtic Studies. The Celts were far from savages, as evidenced by the intricate metalwork and jewelry excavated from ancient Celtic hill forts and burial mounds across Europe. One such mound near Hochdorf, Germany, held the remains of a Celtic chieftain and a wealth of artifacts pointing to a complex and stratified Celtic society. The Hochdorf chieftain's mound dates from 530 BC, what archaeologists call the late Hallstatt period, when Celtic culture was concentrated in Central Europe. The chieftain was laid out on a long bronze couch with wheels and dressed in gold finery, including a traditional Celtic neckband called a torque. He was surrounded by ornate drinking horns and a large bronze cauldron, which still held the remains of high-proof honey mead. Arnold says that the wheeled couch was replaced in later Celtic burial mounds by 2 wheeled chariots that carried the honored dead into an afterlife. The drinking equipment points to the critical role of feasting as a socio-political tool to the Celts. What the Greeks and Romans described as excessive drinking was actually a way for Celtic elites to strengthen ties with allies, and that continued in the great beyond. The ancient Celts were illiterate, says Arnold, meaning that they actively chose not to write down their histories, sacred stories, and laws in order to safeguard the information. The Celtic religion, for example, required animal and human sacrifices to a pantheon of gods, but that esoteric knowledge was restricted to Celtic priests called Druids and passed on orally from generation to generation. Druids were figures of great respect and honor in Celtic society, says John Coke, a historical linguist specializing in early Celtic languages at the University of Wales. Other learned classes of Celts included genealogists who memorized centuries of tribal relations, those responsible for memorizing, then applying the law, and bards, storytellers, and folk historians. Even though the Celtic tribes never unified politically under one kingdom, their oral traditions helped to create and maintain a cultural unity across great geographical distances. That explains why Celts were most easily identified by their shared language. Celtic languages are still spoken in parts of UK and France, including Welsh, Irish, Scottish Gaelic, Cornish, and Breton. Because all of the Celtic doctrines were orally transmitted, it helped to preserve linguistic uniformity, says Koch. The Druids and Bards spoke the most prestigious version of the language, and they carried it across tribal boundaries, so it didn't fragment into a lot of different dialects. The Romans conquered Britain in 43 AC under Claudius, and the Celts were slowly subjugated and Romanized. They didn't go down without a fight, though. The legendary Celtic queen, Boudica, led a bloody revolt against the Romans in 61 AC, in which her forces destroyed the Roman stronghold of Londinium and massacred the inhabitants, according to Roman sources. In Celtic culture, women could hold the highest position in the social hierarchy. Others were druidesses who specialized in political prophecy and played important roles in Celtic military campaigns. Clearly, Celtic women were occasionally allowed to take on the position of supreme authority, which was distinctly different from the Mediterranean world, says Arnold. The Greeks and Romans found that extremely odd. After the Roman conquest of most Celtic lands, Celtic culture was further trampled by Germanic tribes, Slavs, and Huns during the migration period of roughly 300 to 600 AC. As a result, few, if any, people living in Europe and the British Isles identified as Celts until the 1700s, when the Welsh linguist and scholar Edward Lloyd recognized the similarities between languages like Welsh, Irish, Cornish, and now the extinct Gaulish, and labeled them Celtic. Okay, so now we're going to talk about where Halloween comes in. When October 31st lines up with Samhain, it is one of the 4 major Celtic festivals, the others being Imbolc, February 1st and 2nd, Beltane, May 1st and 2nd, and Luxnada, August 1st and 2nd. Similar to Jewish traditions, Celtic days begin at sundown. Samhain begins at dusk on October 31st and ends at sundown on November 1st. It falls between the autumn equinox and the winter solstice. It marks the time when darkness overtakes the light. It is celebrated as the festival called Samhain in Ireland. It is also celebrated in Scotland, and there are similar observances in other Celtic lands, Wales, Cornwall, and Brittany. Some Neolithic sites in Ireland, such as the Mound of Hostages at the Hill of Tara, were constructed to specifically capture the sunrise on Samhain, or otherwise known as Halloween. This is evidence that the people who inhabited Ireland long before the Celts held that date in high regard. It is believed that during both Samhain and Beltane, the barriers between the world of the living and the land of the spirits is at its weakest. This allowed the dead to easily cross over and inhabit the land of the living for a period of time. The Celts would prepare large meals, keep their doors open, and leave empty seats at the table so that dead ancestors could visit and have a chat with their living relatives. The wearing of costumes, also called mumming or guising, is believed to serve the purpose of blending in with the spirits of the other world. It was thought that by dressing up, one would fool those spirits into thinking you were one of them, and would therefore protect you. Safety and preservation of livestock during the harsh winter months was of paramount importance to the ancient Celts. By dressing in costume and going door to door in song, it was thought that the bribe of treats would appease the spirits and they would not kill your livestock during the long winter. While vandalism associated with Halloween has dropped dramatically over the years, the idea that those who gave treats would be spared damage to property, and it's clearly a throwback to appeasing wandering spirits for protection. Arguably the most recognizable of the season's symbols, the jack-o'-lantern has its roots in Ireland and other parts of Europe. While pumpkins are used today, turnips and other gourds were also used in the past. One particular Irish tale tells of Stingy Jack, a blacksmith who tricks Satan into climbing an apple tree. Once the devil gets to the top, Stingy Jack places and carves crosses on the tree, trapping Satan at the top. Jack will only release Satan on the promise of never taking his soul. Due to his earthly sins, Jack could not enter heaven, and because of his deal with the devil, he could not go to hell either. He is therefore destined to wander the earth, the lights of Hades illuminating from his carved gourds. Samhain is recognized as the Celtic New Year. Similar to days beginning at sundown, it was recognized that New Year ushered in earthly darkness. Traditionally, this is the time when livestock were brought in for slaughter. The colder weather made it an ideal time for the killing and preservation of meats and fowls. Until the 8th century, Christians celebrated All Saints' Day in May. then named Lemuria. Pope Gregory III moved the celebration to correlate with Samhain, which had a similar time of honoring the dead. Like many ancient celebrations, Celtic and otherwise, fire played a prominent role. To symbolize the end of the year, home fires were extinguished. Soot and ash from these fires was used to coat the skin as a means of protection. Communal bonfires were built as part of the Samhain festivities. It was from these fires that personal hearths were relit for the new year. While there is some indication of recognition of All Hallows' Eve by some early Anglican and Catholic settlers, it is not until the mass exodus from Ireland as a result of the Great Hunger that Halloween and its predecessor, Samhain, are introduced on a large scale in the Americas. The first record of children dressing up and going door to door for treats comes from Kingston, Ontario, Canada in 1911. This is considered the birth of what we know today as Halloween. The black cat symbol is this obsidian feline bringing bad luck, and it comes from the medieval notion that witches had the ability to shapeshift. It was believed that a popular transformation was that of a black cat. The superstition associated with this has carried over the Halloween symbolism. Perhaps this Halloween, you should consider what dead ancestors might come and sit down to have a visit with you. If you have more stories that are creepy, you can reach me at Jill's Chills Podcast on Instagram.
This is a production of Mystery Media Group.
Yay!